Many of you have heard us talk about Hormone Harmony by Happy Mammoth, the supplement that helps women maintain optimal hormone levels, with over 50,000 glowing reviews from women worldwide and 98% saying they recommend it to friends and family. Now you can take those results even further by pairing it with their prebiotic collagen protein, which helps restore gut lining integrity, promoting overall hormone levels. Now, I've struggled with occasional digestive issues, and since taking the prebiotic collagen protein, I've noticed a real lift in my energy and overall well-being. Happy Mammoth is dedicated to making women's lives easier. And that means using only science-backed ingredients that have been proven to work for women. They make no compromise when it comes to quality, and it shows. Right now, you can try prebiotic collagen protein and Hormone Harmony risk-free and get 15% off your entire first order with the code DATEABLE at checkout. That's happymammoth.com and use the code DATEABLE for 15% off today.
Have you ever rooted for a central couple in a horror movie? Then you are going to love House of Rain by New York Times bestselling TikTok sensation Harley LaRue. Happy endings and horror can mix after all. It's a gothic sapphic romance meets supernatural suspense, equal parts sinfully spicy and bone chilly. Salem was supposed to be on her honeymoon. Instead, she's trapped at Belfour Manor with Rain, a woman hiding secrets as dark as the house itself. This book gets 4 out of 5 peppers for bringing the heat. If you're a fan of The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager or Verity by Colleen Hoover, this must-read thriller is for you. The book just sucks you in. I swear I even caught myself looking behind my shoulder once or twice because Harley LaRue builds this tension that just lingers. You can find House of Rain by Harley LaRue wherever books are sold in print and in ebook. The gorgeous deluxe hardcover first printing is only available for a limited time, so grab yours before they are gone.
Hi, I'm Yue Xu.
And I'm Julie Krafchick.
We're active daters turned dating insiders.
Here to dive into everything modern dating and relationships.
Welcome to Dateable. Hello, Dateables.
Welcome back to another phenomenal episode that we have in store for you all.
That's a great word. We need to be using that word more. Phenomenal.
That's how I would describe this in every use of that word.
Charles Duhigg, who is our guest today. I want to know, have you ever been described as phenomenal? We should ask him.
Probably. He definitely has. I mean, I think he's our first Pulitzer Prize winning journalist that we've had. So that's pretty phenomenal.
That's phenomenal. He definitely is. He has written for the New York Times, the New Yorker. He's also the author of 3 best-selling books, including The Power of Habit, Smarter, Faster, Better, and Supercommunicators.
And Supercommunicators is what we are going to hone in on because, of course, communication, relationships goes hand in hand. But if you've been with us for some time, we really believe that dating, there's a lot of miscommunication and a lot of room for better, more clear, concise communication. And he really dives into, we look at it through that lens of like, how do I form connection with people? Like, how do I have, communication, I feel like is a very broad word. It could be just from shooting the shit, having conversations with my dates and feeling natural to working through, miscommunications and issues that arise.
And he'll give you a blueprint of how to become a super communicator yourself. We are all hopeful in this category. You may have started not as a great communicator. In fact, Charles says a lot of bad communicators will say they're good communicators. So that's the number one indicator. But either way, whether you're good, bad, average, there's always a next level up, and Charles will show you the way.
And I think I'm not going to go into too much depth because I want you all to hear it from Charles directly. But there's this part about how on the surface, there's multiple conversations happening all at once. There's different lenses that we're viewing conversations through. So we might be saying something and it gets interpreted a different way based on what lens we're looking at. I actually just I talk about this on the episode, so again, won't go too deep, but there was a serendipitous moment where my partner actually had listened to Charles talk about this on the podcast with Dan Harris, 10% Happier, that talks about mental health, and great podcast. And he actually used the learnings that he learned from that podcast in kind of a conversation that we were having that wasn't going that far because we were speaking in different languages. So I think his work is so applicable. I've already even re-editing this episode, I was okay, there's some stuff I need to start applying to my life ASAP from here of, making assumptions and, things that I feel I've come a long way in communication, but there's always, sometimes easier to say it than to actually do it. And he just had so many just gems of information in this.
Yeah, it's brilliant to think about the way we communicate, because so much of what we do in communication is default. It's our default setting. And that's why they say you're a lot more empathetic if you communicate in a second language that you learned that's not your native language, because you're more thoughtful and intentional. And I find this all the time, with a partner that I've been with for a while. I default to the comfortable way of communication that is without curiosity. And when I do that, I just make all my assumptions, I replay all my old patterns, and then I start hearing things that weren't even said, right? I start hearing things that I thought I heard or wanted to hear, because that's your default. It's what's laziest, most comfortable way of communicating. And I find myself now replaying all of my dates from the past, doing that on almost every single date, assuming that someone just spoke my language and they knew exactly what I was talking about and that I knew everything about them because of something they said. There were so many misleading conclusions that I made on these dates that probably left a different impression than what I thought I had left, because I was communicating in a totally different language.
And, it's one of those things with all of this that it's a skill, it's a muscle that we build, and sometimes we backslide. And actually, I'm thinking about the episode we did a couple weeks ago with Jordana and Jared, and we talked about, what is that one thing that you hear all the time that is the way to move forward with relationships and dating, but sometimes you don't actually do it. And Jordana's answer was communication. Is I know what I should say when I get a little heated. I know how I should approach it, but sometimes that, anger comes over, or I just forget and backslide. So I think for me personally, just the more types of episodes like this, the better, because it reinforces and eventually that, because it's so unnatural, I think, to how a lot of us have learned to communicate, but it is really such a difference. And every time I, go to this type of approach versus the instinct approach, it's just such a more fruitful conversation.
Absolutely. It's more productive. You actually get somewhere instead of just trying to prove your point or trying to be right. And I also just think, again, it's important to reiterate that you get to learn these skills on this episode, that it's not a lost cause, but also to reaffirm the fact that we're all doing bad communication. You're not the only one. We were not taught this. Our parents are probably bad communicators, so we inherited a lot of those speech patterns. But now it's our chance. It's never too late.
I think at least where we are right now, we're talking about it. And being a therapy generation, I do think we've come a long way, because I do see it, it's become a newer thing maybe to voice things as they come up, and that every disagreement doesn't have to turn into a fight. And I think personally it's helped me in my relationships so much. And I'm glad that this is something I've personally spent a lot of time trying to work on. I can always get better. There's definitely areas, and re-listening to this episode reminded me of some of them, but it's something that we shouldn't feel bad if we don't get it right 100%, but as long as we're getting just a little better each conversation.
I was having a conversation with a couple friend of mine, and I always like asking couples to recount some experience they went through, whether it was their first fight or the first time they started dating, and I have them tell the story separately. And there's without a doubt, there's always a moment where the other one disagrees. Like, I don't remember that happening. That's not what I said, or that's not what went down. And the other one's like, that's exactly how I remember it. And I realize the point is not to get everybody on the same page, because you're always going to walk away with a different story, a different memory. The point is, how do you move forward?
Yeah.
That's aligned. And none of us will ever see reality the same way as the person next to us. But at least we can be open enough to see it through their eyes and acknowledge that their reality, their truth is also true.
You saying that reminded me of, as the officiate, you had asked us some questions.
Yeah.
And one of them was like, when did you know that this was like something real? And my immediate response, and I was like, actually for a second, I'm like, do I want to say this? Because it will get repeated. But it was during a time of misunderstanding. Like my partner said something that I interpreted a certain way, and it wasn't how he meant it, but to me it came off a certain way. And I think the old me would have just been like, I'm done, I'm moving on. But I chose to like talk it through and like really understand, and it got us to like a way better place that I'm not sure if we would have actually got to the level of closeness had that not happened. I mean, it probably would have eventually, something would have been a misunderstanding again, because I think misunderstandings happen so frequently. But in dating, we're just so quick to like move on to the next as soon as like anything comes up. And the reality is, like with any partner, there's gonna be something. So if we're always moving on, that just keeps us single like indefinitely.
Would you say that was the first time you intentionally leaned into the to the miscommunication, to explore what that meant? So that's like something that you did differently in this relationship.
100%. Yeah. I think in the past I would have talked to my friends about it. I would have fumed silently. I would have just like been done, not giving someone a chance to explain further and talk it through. And this was something so different for me that I had never done before.
Yeah. And that it worked. It worked, everybody. So this is an episode that could save your relationship, or at least...
Or get it off the ground even, you know?
Yeah. Save you from all the wasted energy on trying to interpret something that you've misinterpreted. Let's just get to the clarity of communication, not like you interpreting what it could be.
And we did also ask Charles one of the top questions we get about like, what do you do if like you're the one leading all the conversation and you're not getting it back from the person you're on a date with? Like, what does that mean? Should you give them another chance because it's pre-date jitters? Are they just a terrible conversationalist? Are they self-absorbed? And I think he does a phenomenal job answering that. So if this is something you're dealing with, that we hear so many of you dealing with, listen and make sure you tune in for that part.
In the episode, we had the two, at least I did. I had our book and his book right next to each other, and it was like a match made in heaven. It's like, wow, these books look really good together. Very complementary colors. They should date. They should go out. But also just like read the two books together. You can actually alternate between them, because you'll find so much of it to be relatable. Like you can read his book and then relate it back to dating and then come back to our book for those sections.
Yes. Love it. And as a reminder, How to Be Dateable out now. Go to any bookstore. We still have some signed copies floating around that I've been seeing, which is amazing. I stopped by Chestnut Street Books Inc. because it's literally across the street from my gym. And they are constantly refreshing our book. And I'm constantly signing new copies. So go in there. If you're at SF in New York, there's quite a few floating around wherever you are. Or if not, audiobook is also the way to go if you are a listener, if you enjoy the podcast, if you want something a bit more substantial that ties together truly everything we've done on this podcast. Go get that audiobook and listen today.
Yes.
Okay. Well, before we get into it with Charles, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors.
Did you know that 38% of adults who have ever used a dating site or app report receiving unwanted sexually explicit messages or images? That's why we're so excited that the dating app Highly just introduced a new feature called Consent Guard that reduces unsolicited sexual behavior and starts a conversation about digital sexual consent. Because maybe you don't want to get a nude sent to you in the middle of your workday, but you are down for some sexy banter once you're home and you've been chatting for a bit. When the person you're chatting with sends a sexualized image or text, Highly sends you a notification, and you can decide to accept or deny the message. The power is in your hands. Launched in 2017, Highly encourages everyone to date as you are. Finally, an app that promotes authenticity, self-acceptance, open-mindedness, and inclusivity. No wonder Highly, short for Hey, I Like You, has become one of the top dating apps in U.S. app stores, with over 39 million downloads worldwide. If you want safer dating, download Highly from the App Store or Google Play, or check out Highly.com. That's spelled Hily.com. Date as you are, safely with Highly.
Okay, let's talk about what it means to be a super communicator.
Everyone will tell you communication is the most important thing in a relationship. And I would say most people think they're good at communicating. But do people actually know what communication is? I don't personally know exactly what it is. I like to think I'm a good communicator, but we've got an expert with us today, Charles Duhigg, who's just not just reading your book, but seeing some of the interviews that you've done and the talks that you've done. You've really broken down what a good communicator is. And it's not what most people think. So welcome to Dateable.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me on. This is such a treat for me.
We're so excited because, yes, relationships communication is key, but we always say, like, we think dating, there's maybe under communication happening, a lot of misinterpretations. Yes. So we're excited to move that conversation through all stages.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think that whenever we have a dating horror story, it usually has its roots in some kind of miscommunication, right? He said this and I thought he meant that, but actually it turns out it meant something completely different or vice versa. There's a lot of opportunities for pitfalls here, but also just for missed connections, missed opportunities to really connect with someone because we don't understand perhaps how communication works, what the science of it tells us.
So do you, your whole book is called Supercommunicators. What is a supercommunicator to you? And then why is this so important?
It's a great question. So let me ask you guys a question to answer it, which is, if you were having a really bad day, you come home from work, terrible day at work, and you want to call someone up because, just calling them would make you feel better.
Yeah.
Do you know who you would call? Does that person pop into your mind?
Yes.
Yeah? So who is it?
My mom.
Fiance.
Okay. So your fiance and your mom. So for you guys, your mom and your fiance are super communicators. And you're probably a super communicator back to them, right? You know what question to ask them to figure out what's really going on. You know when they need kind of a little bit of tough love or when they just need a sympathetic ear. You know how to make them feel heard and listened to and how they have a real connection with you. Now, we tend to think that this is just because we have a special relationship with those people. But actually, what we know from study after study is that when you're talking to your fiance or talking to your mom, you're using a set of skills that you might not even recognize as skills. They might be so ingrained in that relationship that at this point you just feel like it's natural. But once you recognize them as a skill, then you recognize that you can use that skill with anyone. You can use it with someone you work with. You can use it with your parenting. You can use it with your coworkers. Communication is just a set of skills that anyone can learn. The more that we understand those skills and practice them, the faster they become habits. And when they do, we can connect with almost anyone.
So in that example, I would say my mom, if I'm having a bad day, because she knows immediately I just need to vent. She doesn't go into problem solving mode or she doesn't try to console me. She's just there to listen. But is that a product of her being a super communicator? Or those are the skills that she learned from dealing with me? Or is that from me, somehow I've been able to communicate that need to her?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think what's happening there is one of the things that we know about super communication. So just to root this in kind of how I got interested in it, I got interested in this about 5 or 6 years ago when I fell into this bad pattern with my wife, which speaks to exactly what you're saying with your mom, which is that some days I would come home from work. I was a reporter at the New York Times at that point, and I would come home and I'd start complaining about my day and talking about how, my coworkers don't realize what a genius I am and my boss doesn't appreciate all the work I do. And my wife very reasonably would offer me some good advice. She would say something like, why don't you take your boss out to lunch and you guys can get to know each other a little bit better? And instead of being able to hear her good advice, I would get even more upset, right?
Yeah.
I would say, why aren't you supporting me? You're supposed to be outraged on my behalf and be on my side.
Yes.
So I went to these researchers and I asked them, what's going on here? Because I think anyone in a relationship knows that this pattern plays out at times. And the researcher said, well, we're really glad you came by because we're kind of living through this golden age of understanding communication for really the first time because of advances in neural imaging and data collection. We really know what's happening inside people's brains when they're talking to each other. And they said, one of the things that we've discovered is that when you're having a discussion, you tend to assume you know what that discussion is about, right? We're talking about my day or where to go on vacation or the budget for next year, for next quarter. But they said, actually, what's really happening inside your head is that you're having many different kinds of conversations all at the same time. And in general, these conversations tend to fall into one of three buckets. There's these practical conversations, which is about solving problems or making plans. But then there's emotional conversations where I tell you what I'm feeling, and I don't want you to solve my feelings. I want you to empathize with me. And then finally, there's social conversations, which is about how we relate to each other and how we relate to society. And what they said is that what we've discovered is if you and the person you're talking to are not having the same kind of conversation at the same moment, you do not fully hear each other. You do not feel connected to each other. So when you are talking to your mom and she knows that you want to vent rather than you're looking for a solution from her, what she knows, what she's listening for is that you need to have an emotional conversation. You're in an emotional conversation mindset. And she matches you there. And that feels wonderful. In fact, within psychology, this is known as the matching principle. It says that successful communication requires having the same kind of conversation at the same moment.
So we had this serendipitous moment that we got in touch with you. And when I told my fiance about this, he's like, this is the guy I was telling you about that I heard on 10% Happier. And it was because of these like three types of conversations. And we had this situation where we were talking about finances and we were just not hearing each other at all. Like it was like one of those conversations that just was not going anywhere. And I felt not heard. He felt like, I don't understand, like what I'm like being logical here. Like, why is this not comprehending? And then we went to yoga, and after yoga, he like apologized, and he was like, I was approaching this conversation with a logical mind frame and like more of this like pragmatic outlook. And I realized in yoga that this was an emotional connection. He brought it back to the podcast he heard you on 10% Happier.
Oh, I'm so happy that helped.
And it was, to me though, it was such a nice moment because I was like, I feel seen. Like I feel seen that someone understands me and that he was able to come to that consensus, of course, with the help of you. But like, how do you like, what are some other examples maybe where you think you're having one convo, but maybe there's like a different one under the surface?
No, it happens all the time. Financial conversations is a great example, right? Because oftentimes when we're talking about finances, we adopt this very practical demeanor. Right, we're making up a budget. We're trying to figure out like how much to spend on how much we can afford on a down payment of a house. But often, if you were to listen to what people were saying instead of just paying attention to the words, looking at how they were saying it, what you'll see is very often people talking about their anxieties, or talking about their hopes, using emotional words, talking about how they feel, and say, you know, I don't think we should put that much in a down payment because it just makes me like really worried that like we're not going to be able to afford all the bills going forward. That word worried, that shows what kind of mindset I'm in. Or take, for instance, when we're making plans and we're trying to decide where to go on vacation next year. Right? Again, it can sound pretty practical. Like, oh, do you want to go to the beach or do you want to go to the mountains or should we go to a city? But if you listen more closely, what you'll hear is people saying things like, yeah, you know, like I feel like whenever we go to the beach, like I get bored after a couple of days and I really want to do something active with you. Like I love it when we like go and we're like exploring things together and we're learning together. Okay, so that person's actually in a much more social mindset. They're talking about their relationship with you. It's not really a practical conversation yet.
Right.
Now, at some point, every discussion we have usually moves through all three different kinds of conversations. And what's important is that we move together. So like when I come home and I start complaining about my day, my wife will often ask me, Like, do you want me to help you solve this problem or do you just need to vent?
Right.
She's asking, do you want to be an emotional conversation or a practical conversation? I'll say, oh, no, I just need to vent. I just need to get this off my chest. And after a couple of minutes, she might say, now that I understand what you're feeling, can we talk about like some ways to solve this?
I like that.
In other words, do I have your permission to move from an emotional to a practical conversation? And when you do that, when you move together, that's when you feel like you're really aligned with each other.
Yeah. But you, as the person coming to your life, you also have to know what it is that you're looking for. And I think this is sometimes what I struggle with is I come in blazing hot with some sort of issue, but then I don't actually know what I'm asking for from my partner or from the person I'm talking to. So is that also part of the communication?
Absolutely. Sometimes we go into a conversation and we're like a hot mess. We don't know what we actually want or need. And so it's important. Now, there's a lot of tricks to help us figure out what's going on and what we actually want and need from a conversation. One of them is just to have a conversation with ourselves. To take 10 seconds and ask yourself 3 questions. Okay, I'm about to talk to my husband about this thing that I'm feeling really worked up about. What's one thing that I want to tell him? What's one question that I want to ask him? And what's one thing that I hope he tells me? Simply doing that will oftentimes, it takes like 10 seconds to think about this before you start a conversation. That will often tell you exactly what you need to know to figure out what you want out of that conversation. And psychologists refer to the beginnings of conversations as quiet negotiations, where we're actually negotiating with the other person about what to talk about. And the goal of a quiet negotiation is not to win. It's not to have my vision, compel your vision. It's to figure out what both of us want. And when we walk into a conversation with that mindset, I want to figure out what you want out of this conversation. I'm trying to figure out what I want out of this conversation. I want to share it with you. It gets a lot better.
I love that. Just taking that little breather moment.
Yeah.
And especially I think in long-term relationships, it makes sense because you're on the same team. But what we see in early dating is a lot of people are like, it's too early to say that. I don't want to share my needs. Like, we don't know each other well enough. I can't do that. What is your kind of advice for early relationship communication?
So there's been a lot of studies into this, particularly around dating. And one of the things that's been found to be particularly effective is, in any kind of conversation, is asking more questions. The consistent supercommunicators, they ask about 10 to 20 times as many questions as the average person.
Wow.
Now, not all questions are created equal, though, right? Because some questions we ask are just surface questions. Where do you work? Where did you grow up? We're asking about the facts of someone's life. Yeah. But what's much more powerful is to ask someone how they feel about their life. Instead of saying, oh, you decided to become a lawyer. What made you decide to go to law school? Or oh, you live in the Heights. What do you like about the Heights? Why'd you move up there? When we ask those why questions, when we ask people how they feel about their life, what we're doing is we're inviting them to say something real and meaningful, to tell us about their values, their beliefs, and their experiences. And when we do that, very often we figure out what kind of mindset they're in. Are they in an emotional mindset, a practical mindset, a social mindset? But also, what are they looking for in this conversation? Right? They tend to tell us I live up in the Heights because I really value community. And that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to come on this date with you, is because I'm looking for someone to settle down with. And that's really important to me. And I'd love to know what you're looking for. Deep questions are so much easier to ask than we think they are. Basically, any question can be made into a deep question just by asking someone why, or what do you make of that? Or how did that make you feel? Or what happened? When we ask those deep questions, what we're doing is we're inviting the other person to say something real, and they'll tell us something real.
So one thing we see happen in early dating is something doesn't go your way, right? You don't get that text as quick as you want, or the date doesn't happen, and people make up a lot of stories in their mind instead of just asking the other people. What would your recommendation be to address that? Would it be just to get curious and ask more questions?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this expression that I love, which is if you're feeling furious, get curious.
Yeah.
That when you're feeling kind of worked up and you're why hasn't he answered my text? Why does she keep canceling on me? Rather than letting yourself be upset, just literally ask them. Be look, I'm just wondering, we've tried to set up this date a couple times and it keeps on falling through. Is this something that you're just not into? Which is fine if it is. I just want to know if we should continue trying to do this. Or, one of the things I notice is that you communicate differently than I do. And like when there's a big delay in texting, I always wonder, like, does this person really want to be in touch with me? But you tell me, like, I'm a good example here. I actually don't like texting. So when people text me, I almost never text them back.
Right. And it's not personal to them.
Right.
No, it's not personal. It's just the habits that we grow up with. And so I think that just asking those questions can be really, really powerful.
Another example for early dating we hear a lot is, oh, so boring. The conversation was so boring. It couldn't get anywhere. It was like pulling teeth. It was like a date review. We just asked the same old questions.
Yeah.
People often feel like they're experiencing Groundhog's Day with first dates because it's just the same conversations. Now, the question is the onus on you then for not being a super communicator? Because in theory, you should be able to communicate with everyone if you have the skills, or does chemistry actually have something to do with it?
So chemistry is entirely a product of our communication skills, right? What we've discovered is that, like, basically two people don't have chemistry. What they have are matching communication styles, and that creates the perception.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Oh,
now, what I would say is, when it comes to dating, I mean, look, I have deep sympathies for anyone who's like on that hamster wheel, right?
Yeah.
And I've actually been married to my wife for 20 years. We met in college. So like I got to avoid a lot of really awkward conversations. But I will say that there's been a lot of studies on this, and two things have come out. The first is that dating, if you're looking for a relationship, if it feels a little bit like work, that's okay. Like, relationships are work. And just because you sit down and the conversation isn't flowing from the minute you see each other, that does not mean you're not right for each other. It means that you're engaging in that quiet negotiation. You're figuring out how to communicate with each other. And if you're finding that your dates are kind of boring, my guess is it's probably because you and the other person are both asking the same questions you always ask. You're not actually thinking about what questions to ask. But most importantly, you're not asking follow-up questions. So there was a big study that was done by researchers at Harvard Business School looking at speed dating. And they were trying to figure out why some people were more successful at speed dating. Where like they would have these interactions and then people would say, I really want to go on a real date with them. And they found that number one thing that determined whether someone wanted to go on a date with another person was whether they asked follow-up questions. Because the thing about a follow-up question is it can't be rote. Right? A rote question is like, oh, where do you work?
Right.
Oh, really? Where'd you go to school? Oh, where'd you go X, Y, Z? But if you're like, oh, where'd you go to school? And they say, oh, I went to, University of the South. And you say, oh, that's really interesting. I haven't spent any time in the South. Was the South different? Like, because I know you grew up in Massachusetts. Was that like a big culture shock for you? That follow-up question, that proves that I'm listening to you.
Yeah.
But it also can't be rote. It's a real question.
Right.
It's inviting you to say something meaningful about yourself.
Well, you're more present in the convo and like engaging in that back and forth. And we hear that a lot too, of like the convo doesn't volleyball back and forth. And I guess the question like that we always have is like, is it just first date jitters? Is it different communication styles? Or if someone's not asking you anything, are they just like self-absorbed? Are they like, how do people know?
So one of the, again, this idea of invitation is really important. So this often happens to me, right? Because I'm at a party and I'm talking to someone and I've asked them a couple questions and they've answered the questions enthusiastically and they haven't asked me any questions in return.
Yeah.
Right. And what I usually do at that point is I don't assume it's because they're self-involved. I assume that they just might not be practiced at asking questions, right? Lots of people are kind of socially awkward who are wonderful people. And so I'll say something like, oh my gosh, I've been asking you so many questions. You probably have a ton of questions for me. Let me give you a chance to ask a question.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
And what you'll find is at that moment, they do have a ton of questions. It's not that they're not curious about you. It's that they're just kind of uncomfortable asking questions and they need to be given permission to do so.
Yeah.
It's also similarly when you're at a party and you're you ever have a conversation with someone and you don't know how to end it. You can do the same thing. You can say, oh, I don't want to take up your whole night. I know that there's other people you want to talk to, but before I let you go, I have one more question for you.
Oh.
Right. And then just ask whatever question you want. Because at that point, what you're doing is you're saying, it's okay for us to end this conversation, but you are so fascinating that I really want to learn something about you. In each of those cases, what we're doing is we're giving the other person permission to do the thing that we want them to do. And if they haven't done that thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like us or they're not interested in us. It just might mean that they just don't know how to make that transition.
Oh, I'm writing that one down. It's always so awkward to get out of conversations without being abrupt, but I love that. I just have
Yeah.
one more question
Yep.
for you. Where is
Set
the
the
bathroom?
expectation.
Right, exactly.
Where is the cheese?
We've noticed a couple like friends of ours and people like that we've engaged with through Dateable talk so much. It's almost like they're filling the void in conversation. And sometimes we equate talking a lot to being a good communicator. But this often backfires because you're not giving anyone the space to be in the convo with you and you're just talking
Yeah.
at them. What would you say to these types of people? And like, what's the balance of not like changing who you are as a person versus like actually connecting with people? Because it feels like it's
Yeah.
not there.
So in most conversations, we should have what's known as equality in conversational turn taking, because that's what creates psychological safety. Now, that doesn't mean that I speak the exact amount that you speak, right? Like I might be someone who's kind of quiet and introverted, and you might be more extroverted, and that's fine. But what's important is that we're both participating in the conversation, that it's not monologues alongside each other, but it's actually a dialogue. And what that means is that people can experiment with, for instance, interrupting each other. Like in some conversations, interruptions don't work. But in other conversations, interruptions are a sign that the conversation is going really well. In
Right.
fact, very frequently, the best conversations contain a lot of interruptions. So I think that the more that people try and think about, have I been talking a lot? Like, have I asked this person questions? Have I invited them to have equality in conversational turn taking? When we allow for that to happen, when it's a priority for us, our habits lead us to it very, very quickly. And this is an interesting thing about how our brains have evolved. We are very good at communication. If you think about it, communication is Homo sapiens' superpower, right? It's the thing that sets our species apart from every other species. And so our brains are really, really good at communicating. And the goal that we have, that kind of thing in the back of our head, that tends to influence how we communicate. And if the goal in the back of our head is, I don't want there to be any silences. Silences are weird and they're awkward. And it's just like, I like feel bad if like, it seems like we're not talking all the time, then you're going to fill all the silences with chatter.
Yeah.
But if your goal instead is to say, I really want to get to know this person. Like my goal is to understand them and to speak in such a way that they can understand me, then you're going to act differently and it's going to be more of a conversation.
So what if people really harp on the subject of the conversation? So we often hear this from daters. Oh, they didn't like talking about music festivals, or they didn't like talking about restaurants. So we just didn't have a connection. And I sometimes experience this in my own relationship because my partner doesn't like to gossip. And I love gossiping about celebrities. And he's like, we don't know these people. Why are we talking about them? And I'm like, I want to know if Nicole Kidman got a facelift or not. And then so I feel like there's a disconnect when we get on these topics that I get really interested in. How do you, as a super communicator, is it your goal to get this person on board, or is it your goal to just find another topic that you can bond over?
I mean, what would probably be optimal is to find something you're both interested in, right? there's definitely enough of those topics. I mean, look, not everyone is a great pairing, right? If I like am completely bored by gossip and you love gossip, and we have nothing else in common, we probably should not be together, right?
True.
And it's okay. It's okay. We can have a perfectly nice dinner and be like, okay, see you sometime next lifetime.
Never.
Right? But what's much more likely is that, like, I'm saying, like, oh, do you love gossip? And they say, no, I don't like gossip at all. And I say, oh, what do you like? And they say, I really like movies. And I say, oh, I like movies too. Right?
Just move on.
We tend to have things in common, particularly when we start asking those deep questions. We tend to find things in common very, very quickly. There's an experiment that actually I do when I give speeches about communication that's been done a number of times, where the audience is told to turn to the person next to them and to ask and answer one question. And that question is, when is the last time you cried in front of another person?
Wow.
And nobody likes this idea. Everybody thinks this is like a terrible, and then they do the experiment, and they have the conversations, and they say it's some of the best conversations they've had in the last week, right? They love doing it. Because inevitably what they find is that they have something in common with the stranger sitting next to them, right? They both had fathers who got ill, or they both have kids, and just thinking about their kids makes them sort of cry with happiness. Or they moved to a new city, or they got fired from a job, or they got hired for a new job. We all have so much in common by virtue of the fact that we are humans. And in fact, if you're dating, the odds that you have something in common with this person you're talking to are much, much higher because we don't tend to date people who are very, very dissimilar from ourselves. We tend to date people who have no more than 1 or 2 degrees of separation in a social network. And so I think what's important is not to say, the only thing I like talking about is gossip in restaurants. And if they don't like gossip in restaurants, they are dead.
It's over. Yeah.
That's probably yet less useful than saying, look, the goal of a first date is to figure out what we have in common and what we like talking about that overlaps. And that might be a very small number of things or a very large number of things. But figuring that out, that's going to tell us whether we're a good pair.
So I want to get your take on this. Like, what's the line of letting the conversation flow organically? Because what we were talking about earlier, the best questions are usually the follow-up when you're present versus having maybe some of those more like thought provokers, like when's the last time you cried or something that can like get you there. Like, what's the line of being prepared versus organic in your opinion?
So I'll tell you what the science says. There was a study that was done where they had a big group of students and they told them, look, we want you in 5 minutes to have a conversation with a stranger. And this is like one of the most anxiety producing things you can ask people to do is to go have a conversation with a stranger. And they said, but before you do, here's what we want you to do. Write down 3 things you might want to talk about, right? It could be anything. Like this will take like a minute. Like, have you seen that new Marvel movie? And are you going to the party this weekend? And, do you like Saturday Night Live? Just write down whatever you feel like. Or maybe questions, where are you from? And so people did this. It took about 30 or 45 seconds. They wrote down 3 questions and then they stuck the piece of paper in their back pocket and they went and they had these conversations with strangers. And afterwards, the researchers asked them, how did that go? And the people said, oh my gosh, that conversation went so much better than I expected it to. Like I thought it was going to be like weird and awkward, but it wasn't. And then the researchers asked, well, did you ever ask those 3 questions that you wrote down or those 3 topics? And they said, no, it really didn't come up, but I just felt so much more comfortable and like in the moment because I knew I had these things in my back pocket that I could ask about. And in some cases they said, there actually did come up, like only one of them. The other 2 we never got to. So I think that this question of being in the moment, how do we get in the moment? How do we figure out the big questions that we want to ask? The answer is that we have a mix of them and we have those big questions in our back pocket, but that we also don't feel like we have to ask them if the conversation's going well. I mean, I'm sure that everyone who goes on a first date, they have those 3 or 4 questions in their back pocket, right? They know, look, what's really important to me is like, how did your last relationship end? Are you like damaged and like traumatized, or like is it something that just kind of petered out and that's okay? But if we ask that right away, if we come in and we say, okay, look, I've got 3 questions for you. Number 1, it might not go well.
Nope, the date interview does not go well.
But if we know those 3 questions, then we're probably going to be able to get to them if they're really important to us. And if we don't get to them, it's probably because the conversation has been so delightful that we didn't have the opportunity to ask them.
Right. It's a win-win. And on the receiving end, if you feel like the question is a little too big for you right now, I'm not ready to answer this yet. What's the best way to communicate that?
Well, I mean, I think that what you can do is you can answer the question that you wish that they had asked. So if they say like, how did your last relationship end? And you're thinking like, I don't want to get into it. This is like, you can say something like, one of the things that makes me really happy is we're still friends with each other. We still talk a lot. Right. So instead of answering your question, I answered a question that I wish you had asked, which is, are you still in touch with your ex? What's it like? Are you able to maintain a friendship after a romantic relationship? Nobody ever has to have any conversation that they don't want to have. Nobody has to answer any question that they don't want to answer. And the goal here is not to say like every conversation should be perfect. The goal is to say that when you want to connect with someone, here are the skills that help make that connection possible. And there's lots of people that you don't want to connect with. There's lots of people you go on dates and you say like, oh, that was fun and that was interesting. And like, he's kind of a dud. I don't need to do this again. But what's important is to have those things in your back pocket so that when you do want to make that connection, you know how to do it.
I want to dive into this even more, but before we do, let's take a quick break to hear from our partners. Cooler days call for layers that last, and Quince is my go-to for quality essentials that feel cozy, look refined, and won't blow your budget. Think a Mongolian cashmere sweater for only $50, premium denim that fits like a dream, and luxe outerwear you'll wear year after year. I'm eyeing their wool coats. They look designer level but cost a fraction of the price. And the quality just as good, if not better, because Quince partners directly with top-tier ethical factories and cuts out the middleman. I recently went on quite the Quince haul, getting a tan cashmere sweater and silk skirt I plan on wearing to Thanksgiving. Find your fall staples at Quince. Go to quince.com/dateable for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/dateable to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/dateable.
What's the one thing about your health you wish someone had told you years ago? Well, for me, it's how important the gut is. Truly, the gut is the foundation of overall health and vitality. It's not just about digestion. The gut affects everything from your energy levels and mood to weight management and even longevity. And while most gut supplements contain probiotics or probiotics and prebiotics at best, Bioma contains all 3 essential ingredients your gut needs. Visit gobioma.com/dateable today. That includes prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics. Each ingredient is science-backed and third-party tested. Just take 2 capsules before breakfast and take the guesswork out of feeling your best. Visit gobioma.com/dateable today. That's GOBIOMA.com/DATEABLE. So I've tried a lot of things that claim to make life easier, but Knix leak-proof period underwear is one of the only brands that truly delivers. I no longer wear clunky pads or toxic tampons, and the defining moment for me was when I was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, living in fear that my period would come early. And then I remembered I brought my trusty Knix period underwear, and that fear completely subsided. There's no way I could have been changing pads and tampons at 19,000 feet. So Knix, Knix, has completely changed how I feel about my period. Their leak-proof technology looks, feels, and washes like normal undies, but have a range of absorbencies for your lightest to heaviest days. Up to 6 super tampons, so you are totally covered. Plus, Knix has patented bonded edges to prevent side leaks. And with buttery soft, stretchy fabric in cuts like thong, bikini, boy short, high rise, and more, you'll find just the right fit. So head to Knix.com and you'll see why I love Knix. Don't forget to use code DATEABLE for 20% off your order. Get leak-proof undies, amazing bras, and more. That's KNIX.com, code DATEABLE, Knix.com.
That reminds me, we had this instance in our Facebook group where someone posted, they were like, I asked, on a dating app, I was talking to this woman and I asked her, like, are you happy? Or like, are you a happy person? Something like that. And I guess like immediately she was like, why do you want to know that? And then blocked him. And that was the end of it. And he was like, was I overstepping? I think some people were like, well, it's like a little out of context, or like, what do you mean by that? Like, how would you have, outside of just going to the block, how would you have handled that?
Oh, I would have said, look, this conversation worked pretty well. You were trying to figure out if you're compatible, and you figured out you weren't. You're the kind of person who asks questions like, are you happy? And you think about these sort of deep things. And that's not who she is. Now, she could have been more polite. She could have, instead of blocking him, she could have just said hey, I don't have a lot of time to talk. I'll talk to you later. But look, the point of a conversation is not for you to fall in love with each other. It's not even for you to agree with each other, right? Most of the conversations we have with people who see the world a little bit differently than us. The goal of a conversation is simply to understand what the other person is trying to say and to speak in such a way that they understand us. And in this case, I would say to this guy, look, this was actually a great question, because it was this way to cut through really quickly whether this person is someone who's as deep as you and thinks about the same things and is comfortable talking about her feelings or not. And you learn that really, really efficiently. That's, I think, much better than let's go on 3 dates and at the end of 3 dates realize that we're looking for completely different things.
Oh, that's an interesting, also just like what you said earlier, is answer the question you wish you had been asked. And I guess she could have answered it as oh, I see many beautiful things in life on a daily basis, something like that, or contentment is what I'm aiming for, or whatever.
Yeah. Or just said I'm a pretty optimistic person. And and I love gossiping about celebrities. Let's talk about
What about you?
Right. There's a lot of ways to to make these interactions easier.
I think one thing that always gets me is the word communication, because it's such a broad word, right? And you hear people say like our marriage is falling apart because of communication, or we need to get better at our communication. Like to me, it could be what we're talking about of having a conversation versus like truly feeling seen and heard, like logistics to like deep thoughts. Like what's your take on like the broad spectrum of the word communication? And like how do we start breaking it down that we actually like know what we're talking about when we're actually working through something?
Well, communication happens almost anytime we interact with another person. And sometimes happens when we're just interacting with ourselves, right? Communication is at the core of every interaction. So if you're walking down the street with someone, your partner, and you're not saying anything to each other, but you grab his hand, you're communicating, right? You're communicating something about how you're feeling right now and your feelings for him. So in many ways, communication is kind of everything we do. Now, there's lots of parts of life and communication that we don't have to pay that much attention to. You know, when my wife's leaving in the morning and I say like, "Oh, I love you. Have a great day." Like, it's not like I have to give a lot of thought to what to say there, right? And it's not like she has to give a lot of thought to like, what did he really mean?
Right.
But I think in many ways, like when we think about communication, what we're really talking about is we're talking about the most important conversations, right? When it's a conversation where we feel like we're really connecting with someone, or it's a conversation where we have something we really need to discuss, get off our chest, and we're worried about how the other person's going to react. It's those conversations that I think give us the most anxiety. But again, if we start those with these basic principles, asking deep questions, trying to figure out what kind of conversation we're having, proving that we're listening to each other by asking follow-up questions or repeating what the person said, making it clear to them that we're paying attention, then that conversation is going to go much, much better than we anticipated.
Self-awareness is pretty important in all of this. What are some signs that you are a good communicator? And what are some signs that maybe you should be working on your communication skills?
Well, one of the interesting things is that when they do surveys and they ask people, do you think that you're a super communicator? And how confident are you about that?
Yeah.
Basically, anyone who says, I am a super communicator and I'm like 94% confident, they are a terrible communicator. Like everyone in the office is like, that guy just will not shut the hell up, right? So one of the really important things is that if you think that you're a great communicator, that's actually a warning sign that you might have some communication issues.
Oh.
Now, the best communicators, super communicators, inevitably say something like, I think I'm pretty good at communication. I would put but like there's times that I screw up and like I'd put myself at like 85%, right? I think I'm 85, 87%, somewhere around there, maybe 83%. Those are people who tend to be super communicators because what they're really saying is they're saying, I understand that there are skills here and there's skills that I want to practice, but I also understand that I need to think about this. I can't go on autopilot. I can't just assume I'm good at this. One of the things that we know about the best communicators is that if you ask them if they were always good at communication, they inevitably tell you no. They say, you know, when I was in high school, I had trouble making friends. So I had to really pay attention to how like kids talk to each other. Or my parents got divorced and I had to be the peacemaker between them. It's the act of thinking about communication that makes us a super communicator. And so what I would say is that the number one thing that we can do to determine if we're a good communicator is just ask ourselves, how often do you think about how you communicate? Do you, after you've had a tough conversation, do you go back and think to yourself, like, what's something I missed? Like, what's something I could have said differently? What question could I have asked? The same way that when your husband or your fiance was at yoga with you, he was thinking to himself, like, what happened in that conversation about finances that it didn't go as I wanted it to go. The more we think about communication, the better we get at it. And the goal here is not perfection. There is no such thing as a perfect conversation. In fact, the best conversations we've all had, if you look at transcripts of them, they look like a total mess. Because people are interrupting each other. We're starting an idea and then we're getting distracted by some other thought. And we're going off in tangents. But those are great conversations in the moment because a conversation isn't supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be real.
Yeah.
I think that's such an important point for people to hear too, because I know like for me, communication is something I've worked on a lot, like especially in romantic relationships. It was something that I would shy away from. Like I would just not say anything and then resentment would build and that was not good at all. Or my needs weren't heard or I didn't have any needs because I never said them. So that was a huge thing. And then sometimes now I've gone to the other extreme that maybe I'm like asserting too much. So it's like constantly like a work in progress. And I think sometimes sometimes I personally get frustrated if a conversation isn't going the way I think it's supposed to go or like in a timely manner. But what I've learned in my relationship, at least, is that sometimes it takes a little bit for it to come around. Like it will take some time to get to that other side. But then once we do that, to me, I was like, this was a good conversation because we really like got all the different sides out and got to a good place.
If you think about the most important conversations you've ever had, I guarantee you during that conversation, there was a period when you were like, this is awkward and this is weird. And like, there are some conversations when the goal is just to feel good the entire time, right? Like when you're talking to a friend, maybe if you're on a first date, but there are a lot of conversations where the goal isn't to feel good. The goal is to learn something important.
Yeah.
And just because it feels a little awkward, that does not mean you're doing it wrong. In fact, that might mean you're doing it right because you're willing to push through that awkwardness. And sometimes the easiest way to handle it is just to acknowledge the awkwardness.
Yeah.
There's been a bunch of studies looking at when people talk about race, that conversations about race go much, much better if someone starts it by saying, I'd like to talk to you about race. I know that this might be awkward.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Like I'm willing to deal with that awkwardness because this is important to me. I want to talk to you about this and understand your perspectives. Just acknowledging that awkwardness oftentimes is the antidote to it.
I think that's such a good takeaway. And like something we've been saying too is like making your internal thoughts the external in some ways that like helps, get people into your mindset. I mean, you don't have to share every last thought, but like something that like moves it along. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway I'm getting from this conversation, I love this communication equals chemistry. I feel like my mind was kind of blown with that, but it really is like, I think that is like what makes a good date, what makes a good experience. And I mean, I think the stat you gave too of like super communicators 10 to 20 more questions. Is that what you said?
Yeah. 10 to 20 times.
Times. Yeah. I think sometimes we're afraid to ask questions and we don't want to, bombard people and cut people off in communication. But I love that too of like, it's okay to cut people off sometimes. Maybe that's a sign that you're both like in the flow, in the energy, and it's a great conversation. Like I think sometimes when we think that we need to like follow a script, that's when the conversations kind of fall flat in like the date talk.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, look, if you were to ask people who are married to each other, like, did you fall in love the first second you saw that person? Almost nobody says yes, right? Like that doesn't, and frankly, if you do have a date and you're like, oh my God, I'm in love.
It usually
that's
doesn't go anywhere.
A sign that it's not going to work out, right? It's going to be a one night stand. On the other hand, if you ask people, the person you're married to, like, what do you remember about your conversations with them? They'll say, oh, I just really liked talking to them. Like, it was just like, they asked me interesting questions and like I asked them questions. When I asked them questions, they sort of responded to them in like an interesting and honest way. And like, it took a little while for me to realize like, oh, this is someone I might love. But we knew that we liked talking to each other. And that's entirely a product of just having skills that make conversations go better.
That was definitely a side on my first date with my partner. I was like, we never stopped talking. Like, that's what we always say if like, when it was a good match.
My takeaway is I think communication, the way you described it, is like a dance. And like, I think you need to first figure out, does this person even want to dance? And then 2 is, are we listening to the same music? And then 3 is like, the dance is I take a step and then you take a step and maybe you show me a move that I've never seen before. And I show you a move you've never seen before, and I'm willing to learn. And if I don't even know how to learn your move, at least I am honoring your move and really impressed with it, right? There's like that level of curiosity, and there's no winning in dancing with your partner. It's just this back and forth and getting to know each other. So I love that framing it around the outcome is not winning or coming to agreement or coming to some sort of like, oh, we have all this in common. It's just understanding each other within this dance. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I've really loved hearing all of your thoughts, Charles, but I do have one more question for you.
Sure.
Do you like how I use that?
I love it.
I used your skill. If you had to pick one phrase that we should all eliminate from our vocabulary today, what would that be? A phrase that is overused. It doesn't get us anywhere.
I mean, it's so hard because I think that like when I'm listening to people, I often go like, oh, interesting. Oh, that's really interesting. Right. And like, if I listen to recordings of myself, I'm like, God, I said that word 30 times in that conversation.
Us too.
But it is actually interesting. Like, it's like a habit I have because I'm really interested in this person. So I think that the thing that we should eliminate is when we try and tell people who they are. When I say like, The problem with you is, or you're the kind of person who.
That's good.
Like at that
good.
point, what I'm not doing is I'm not asking you a question. I'm not inviting you to tell me about who you are. I'm telling you who I think you are, and that's never going to go well.
Oh, that's good.
Ooh, that's
good
so good.
piece to leave people with. Well, thank you
Yes.
so much for your time.
This has been so much
Where
fun.
can people get your book? Because we highly recommend people to read it.
Sure. You can buy Supercommunicators online on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles, or even better at your local independent bookstore, which is something we should always support. It's also on Audible. I recorded the audiobook. And then if they want to find me, they can just come to my website, charlesduhigg.com, Duhigg. Or I have a Substack called The Science of Better. And I'd love to hear from people.
Awesome. And we'll link all of that in the show notes. And I think Supercommunicators and How to Be Dateable are the perfect complement books.
Me too.
I know. I actually saw both at a bookstore and I put them together. I matched them together on a table. I was like, they belong together. Fantastic conversation. Thank you again for coming on our show, Charles. We're going to wrap up this episode. Stay dateable.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.